People always ask me when I first realized my wife was living a double life. They expect me to tell them about lipstick on a shirt, mysterious phone calls, or late-night texts. The truth is far stranger. I didn't catch my wife cheating. I discovered she had an entirely different family, living on the same street as ours. Even now, saying those words out loud feels insane. My name is Nathan Walker, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had a normal life. I was 39, worked as a structural engineer, and had been married to Vanessa for 10 years. Together we were raising our 10-year-old son, Lucas, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. At least I thought they did. If you had asked me to describe my wife back then, I would have called her kind, dependable, and impossible not to trust. She remembered birthdays, volunteered at Lucas's school, baked cookies for our neighbors every Christmas, and somehow always made our house feel like home. She wasn't perfect. Neither was I, but I never imagined she was capable of lying on a scale that would destroy 2 families at once. Looking back, the warning signs were there. I just explained every single one away. Vanessa had started spending more time out of the house about 2 years earlier. Sometimes she claimed she had meetings with clients. Other times she said she was helping an elderly aunt who lived nearby. When I offered to drive her, she'd smile and say, "Don't worry, Nate. It'll only take an hour." I never insisted. Marriage is built on trust. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Saturday morning. Lucas and I were washing my truck in the driveway while Vanessa was inside making lemonade. Out of nowhere, my son looked at me and asked, "Dad, why don't we ever visit Mom's other house anymore?" I laughed. "What other house?" He shrugged. "The one with the little girl." I stopped moving. "What little girl?" "The one who always hugs Mom." A strange chill ran down my spine. I forced a smile. "Lucas, what are you talking about?" He answered so casually that it made everything even worse. "The blue house. Mom takes me there sometimes when you're at work." Before I could ask another question, the front door opened. Vanessa walked outside carrying a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade. Lucas turned toward her with a grin. "Mom, I was telling Dad about the blue." Her smile disappeared for less than a second. It was so quick that most people would have missed it. I didn't. That tiny change in Vanessa's expression lasted less than a second. Then the smile came back as if nothing had happened. "The blue what?" she asked, setting the tray on the patio table. Lucas pointed down the street. "The blue house." Vanessa laughed. "Oh, that." She looked at me before answering him. "You mean Aunt Melissa's place, sweetheart?" Lucas frowned. "I thought her name was." "Lucas," she interrupted gently, "can you grab the napkins from the kitchen for me?" He sighed dramatically but ran inside anyway. The second the door closed behind him, I looked at Vanessa. "Aunt Melissa?" She nodded without hesitation. "My aunt moved into town last year. I didn't think it was worth bothering you with every little visit." I blinked. "You've never mentioned having an aunt nearby." "She's actually my great-aunt." She shrugged. "We only reconnected recently." It sounded reasonable. Almost. Still, something bothered me. If she's family, why haven't I met her? Vanessa smiled and squeezed my hand. "Because she's 82, stubborn, and doesn't like visitors." Honestly, Nate, you're overthinking this. Maybe I was. By dinner that night, I had almost convinced myself to forget the whole conversation. Almost. The following Tuesday, I left work early because one of our project inspections had been canceled. I decided to surprise Vanessa with lunch. She wasn't answering her phone, so I drove home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. No problem. She was probably shopping. As I walked toward the front door, our neighbor, Rachel Turner, waved from across the street. "Nathan," I smiled. "Hey, Rachel." She walked over carrying a bag of groceries. "I thought your wife would be with you today." "What do you mean?" "I saw her about 20 minutes ago." "Really?" She nodded. She was walking toward Maple Lane. That wasn't strange. Maple Lane was only a few blocks away. Then Rachel added something that made my stomach tighten. "I almost stopped to say hello, but she seemed in a hurry to get back to that blue house. I stared at her. What blue house? The one near the corner. She pointed casually. You know? The one she's always visiting. I forced a laugh. She's visiting her aunt. Rachel looked confused. Your wife told you that? Yeah. A long silence followed. Finally she said, Oh. There was something about the way she said it that immediately put me on edge. What? Rachel hesitated. I probably shouldn't gossip. Rachel. She shifted uncomfortably. I've lived on this street for 15 years. I nodded. I know. And I've seen your wife walking into that house for at least 3 years. 3 years. Not 1. 3. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Are you sure? She looked almost offended. Nathan, I notice everything around here. Then she lowered her voice. I always assumed she had relatives there. I swallowed. So did I. Rachel gave me a sympathetic smile before heading back home. I stood alone in my driveway, staring toward Maple Lane. 3 years. Vanessa had told me she had only recently reconnected with this mysterious aunt. So why had Rachel been seeing her there for 3 years? For the first time in our marriage, I didn't want an explanation. I wanted the truth. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to convince myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe Rachel had confused the dates. Maybe Vanessa had been helping someone long before they became close. Maybe I was letting one awkward conversation turn into paranoia. By the time Vanessa came home, I had already decided not to confront her. Not yet. If something was wrong, I needed facts, not guesses. That evening, she acted exactly the way she always did. She helped Lucas with his homework, laughed at a sitcom we watched together, and even fell asleep on my shoulder halfway through the movie. Looking at her, it was impossible to imagine she was hiding anything. But every time she smiled, I heard Rachel's words in my head. I've seen her going there for at least 3 years. The next morning, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I called in sick. Instead of driving to work, I parked my truck 2 streets away from our house, where Vanessa couldn't see it. At exactly 9:17 a.m., our front door opened. Vanessa stepped outside wearing jeans, sunglasses, and carrying a large tote bag. She looked around for a moment before getting into her SUV. I waited 30 seconds before following her. She didn't drive toward downtown. She didn't head to her office. Instead, she made 3 simple turns through our own neighborhood. Less than 5 minutes later, she parked in front of a blue 2-story house on Maple Lane. The same blue house. I stayed half a block away, hidden behind a row of parked cars. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Vanessa walked confidently to the front door. She didn't knock. She used a key. A key. The door opened, and a little girl with curly brown hair came running outside. She couldn't have been older than 8. The moment she saw Vanessa, she threw her arms around her waist. I missed you. Even from where I stood, I could hear the excitement in her voice. Vanessa hugged her tightly and kissed the top of her head. I missed you too, sweetheart. Sweetheart. Not hi. Not how are you. Sweetheart. A tall man appeared in the doorway a few seconds later. He smiled the way husbands smile when their wives come home. He leaned forward and kissed Vanessa. Not on the cheek. On the lips. For several seconds. My entire body went numb. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I just stood there, frozen, watching another man wrap his arm around my wife's waist as they walked into the house together with the little girl between them. The front door closed. I don't remember getting back into my truck. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I remember was sitting alone in my garage with the engine turned off. For almost an hour, I stared at the steering wheel. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was trying to understand what I had just seen. An affair was one thing, but this looked like a family. And the most terrifying part wasn't that my wife had another man. It was how natural everything between them seemed, as if she'd been living that life for years. I didn't tell Vanessa what I'd seen. Not that day. Not the next day either. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. She'd invent another story, and I'd be left with nothing but my own word against hers. No, I needed proof. Real proof. Over the next week, I became someone I barely recognized. Every morning, I left the house pretending to go to work. Then I'd park a few streets away and watch. Not every day, just enough to notice a pattern. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Every single time Vanessa drove to the blue house. She never knocked. She always used the same key. Sometimes she stayed for an hour. Sometimes she stayed until late afternoon. Every visit looked exactly the same. The little girl would run outside. Vanessa would hug her. A few minutes later, the man, who I still didn't know, would arrive or already be there. They looked comfortable, like people who had built a life together. One Friday, I finally got a clear view of him. He was loading groceries into the garage while Vanessa laughed at something he'd said. Then the little girl grabbed both of their hands. The three of them walked into the house together. If I hadn't known Vanessa was my wife, I would have assumed they were the perfect family. That image haunted me. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I started replaying every moment of our marriage. Every business trip. Every late meeting. Every girls' night. Had any of it been real? Or had she been dividing her life between two homes all along? The answer came sooner than I expected. The following Tuesday, I parked farther down the street than usual. Around noon, a delivery truck stopped in front of the blue house. The driver walked to the porch carrying several large boxes. A minute later, the front door opened. The man signed for the packages. I zoomed in with my phone's camera. The receipt was facing me for just a second. Long enough to read the name, Adrian Foster. At least now I knew who he was. When the driver left, Adrian carried the boxes inside. A few minutes later, Vanessa stepped onto the porch holding a mug of coffee. She smiled at him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Then he kissed her forehead. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of small, unconscious gesture that only happens after years together. That's when I realized something. Adrian wasn't acting like a man having an affair. He was acting like a husband, which meant he probably believed he was one. That thought hit me harder than the kiss I'd witnessed days earlier. What if he didn't know about me? What if he thought I didn't exist? That evening, while Vanessa was putting Lucas to bed, I opened my laptop. I searched for Adrian Foster. Within minutes, I found his company's website. Successful construction business. Married. One daughter. No photos of his wife. Just a short sentence on his biography page. Adrian enjoys spending his free time with his wife and daughter in the community they proudly call home. I read that line 5 times. His wife. He had no idea. Neither of us did. Until now. For the next 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about Adrian. If he knew Vanessa was married to me, then he was just as guilty as she was. But if he didn't, then he was another victim. The problem was, I had no way of knowing which one was true. I considered knocking on his door. I even drove past the blue house twice. Both times I turned around before getting out of my truck. If I was wrong, I could destroy 2 families over a misunderstanding. If I was right, everything would explode anyway. Instead, I hired someone who dealt with facts instead of emotions. Victor Hayes, a former homicide detective who now worked as a private investigator. His office was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and an insurance agency. After I finished telling him everything, he leaned back in his chair without saying a word. Finally, he asked, "Do you want proof? Or do you want the truth?" I thought they were the same thing. He shook his head. "Not always." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've investigated enough family cases to know that what people see isn't always the full story." He folded his hands. "If I take this case, I'll find out exactly who knows what." "How long?" "A week." Felt like forever, but I agreed. Those 7 days were the longest of my life. Vanessa behaved exactly as she always had. She made breakfast. She laughed with Lucas. She kissed me goodbye every morning. If guilt was eating her alive, she never showed it. On the 8th day, Victor called. "I have your answers." I drove to his office immediately. He handed me a thick folder. Inside were photographs. Vanessa entering the blue house. Vanessa leaving it. Vanessa holding Sophie's hand. Vanessa and Adrian shopping for groceries together. Vanessa attending Sophie's school play. Every photo carried a different date, different months, different years. She hadn't been visiting occasionally. She had been living another life. Then Victor slid one final photograph across the desk. It showed Adrian pushing a shopping cart while Vanessa walked beside him. Sophie's backpack hung from the cart. The picture looked painfully ordinary, like any married couple buying groceries. "What does he know?" I asked quietly. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. "This is where things get interesting." He placed copies of property records in front of me. The blue house wasn't owned by Adrian. It wasn't owned by Vanessa either. It was jointly owned by Adrian Foster and Vanessa Foster. I stared at the document. "What?" Victor nodded slowly. "They bought that house together almost 6 years ago." My mouth went dry. "That's impossible." "It gets worse." He handed me another document. A joint bank account, shared utility bills, insurance policies. Everything listed the same address. Everything listed them as husband and wife. I looked up at Victor. "So, he's not pretending?" "No." Victor's expression was grim. "As far as every official record is concerned." He paused. "Your wife has been living as Mrs. Foster for years." Then he looked me straight in the eyes. "And based on everything I've uncovered." He took a slow breath. "I don't believe Adrian has the slightest idea that you exist." I left Victor's office in complete silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Every page inside it proved the same horrifying fact. Vanessa hadn't been having an affair. She had built an entirely separate life. 2 homes, 2 last names, 2 families. Somehow, for years, she'd managed to keep them both alive. That night, she cooked my favorite dinner. Grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, and the chocolate pie she only made on special occasions. She smiled across the table. "Everything okay? You seem distracted." I looked at her, really looked at her. How many times had she sat across from Adrian just like this? How many birthdays had she celebrated with him before coming home to celebrate ours? I forced a smile. "Just tired." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You work too hard." The irony almost made me laugh. Later that evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, Vanessa said she needed to finish a presentation for work. She grabbed her laptop and left the house. I waited 5 minutes. Then I followed her. She drove straight to the blue house. The lights were already on. I parked farther down the street and watched. About 20 minutes later, Adrian arrived. He got out of his SUV carrying a birthday cake. Balloons were tied to the passenger seat. A few seconds later, Sophie opened the front door. She screamed with excitement. "Dad!" She ran into his arms. Vanessa stood behind them, smiling. Then Sophie grabbed both of their hands and pulled them inside. The curtains were still open. From where I sat, I could see the dining room. There were decorations everywhere. Pink balloons, a banner, wrapped presents. The 3 of them stood around the table laughing while Sophie blew out candles. Vanessa leaned over and kissed the little girl on the forehead. Adrian wrapped one arm around Vanessa's waist. Someone took a family photo. I realized then that I wasn't watching an affair. I was watching memories being made. The kind of memories Lucas believed belonged only to us. I drove home before the party ended. For the first time in my life, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. Not because I had lost my wife. I think I'd already accepted that. I cried because my son had been sharing his mother with another child without ever understanding why. The next morning, Victor called again. I found one last thing. I met him at a coffee shop. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. "I wasn't looking for this," he said. "It found me." Inside was a copy of a marriage certificate. I frowned. The date made no sense. Vanessa and I had been married for 10 years. This certificate was issued 6 years ago. I looked at the names. Adrian Foster. Vanessa Foster. I felt my heartbeat stop. This can't be legal. It isn't, Victor replied quietly. There is no record of your marriage ever ending. I looked back at the certificate. So Victor finished the sentence for me. She married another man while still legally married to you. I closed the folder. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered now. How do I tell a man that his wife is also mine? For 3 days, I carried that question everywhere. How do you tell a complete stranger that the woman he kisses every morning has been going home to another husband for years? Every scenario ended badly. If Adrian already knew, I'd look like a fool. If he didn't, I was about to destroy his world the same way mine had been destroyed. Victor gave me one piece of advice. Don't confront Vanessa first. Why? Because if she's been hiding this for years, she'll destroy evidence before you finish your first sentence. He was right, so instead of confronting my wife, I called Adrian. Took me nearly 10 minutes to press the call button. He answered on the 4th ring. This is Adrian. My name is Nathan Walker. A pause. I'm sorry, do I know you? No. Another pause. But we have someone in common. His voice became cautious. What is this about? I can't explain over the phone. Silence. Finally, he sighed. I have 30 minutes tomorrow morning. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop across town. The next morning, I arrived early. Adrian walked in exactly on time. He looked exactly the same as he had in Victor's photographs. Confident, relaxed, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. He sat across from me. So, he smiled politely. What did you want to talk about? I didn't waste time. I slid a framed family photo across the table. It was one of the pictures Vanessa and I had taken with Lucas on our anniversary. Adrian looked down. His smile disappeared. He stared at Vanessa, then at me, then back at the picture. What is this? My wife. He frowned. No. I took a slow breath. Her name is Vanessa Walker. His face turned pale. You're lying. I wish I were. He pushed the photo back toward me. My wife is Vanessa Foster. Without saying a word, I opened Victor's folder. I placed photograph after photograph on the table. Pictures of Vanessa entering both houses. Pictures of our family. Pictures of his family. Copies of the property records. Copies of the bank statements. Finally, the marriage certificate. Adrian didn't speak for almost a minute. He just stared at the documents. Then he whispered, "No." His hands started shaking. This isn't possible. I thought the same thing. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. How long? 12 years with me. He closed his eyes. 8 years with me. Neither of us spoke. The waitress came over to refill our coffee. One look at our faces, and she quietly walked away without saying a word. Finally, Adrian asked, "Does your son know?" "No." He nodded slowly. "My daughter doesn't know either." For a long moment, we sat there in complete silence. Two strangers, connected by the same lie. Then Adrian reached into his wallet. He pulled out a recent family photo. Vanessa stood between him and Sophie, smiling exactly the way she smiled in our family pictures. He placed it next to mine. The two photographs looked almost identical. Different child, different house, same woman, same smile. That's when Adrian looked me in the eyes and quietly said, "I think it's time she answered to both of us." Adrian and I agreed on one thing before we left the coffee shop. Neither of us would confront Vanessa alone. She had spent years manipulating two families. If we gave her time to prepare, she'd come up with another story or disappear altogether. So we made a plan. The following Saturday, Vanessa told me she was spending the afternoon helping organize a charity event. According to Adrian, she had told him she was visiting a college friend. The lies were already starting before the day had even begun. At exactly 2 o'clock, Adrian and I arrived at the Blue House together. He unlocked the front door. Vanessa was in the kitchen. When she saw us standing side by side, every bit of color drained from her face. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she whispered, "Nathan." Her eyes shifted to Adrian. "I can explain." Adrian shook his head. "No." She took a step toward us. "Please, just let me." "For once," I said quietly, "don't lie." She froze. I placed our family photo on the kitchen table. Adrian placed his beside it. 2 pictures. Same woman. 2 different families. Vanessa looked down at them and started crying. She tried to tell us she had never meant for things to go this far. She said she loved both families. She claimed she had been trapped, that every lie had forced another lie until she couldn't find a way out. Neither of us interrupted. When she finished, Adrian asked one simple question. "When were you planning to stop?" She had no answer. That silence said more than any confession ever could. Over the following months, everything unraveled. The authorities investigated her fraudulent marriage documents. Both marriages ended. The financial deception was uncovered, along with years of false records and hidden accounts. Lucas and Sophie eventually learned the truth in age-appropriate ways, surrounded by people who cared about protecting them rather than blaming them. As difficult as it was, Adrian and I kept our promise to each other. The children would never pay for Vanessa's choices. A year later, something happened that I never expected. Lucas had a school science fair. As I walked into the gymnasium, I saw Adrian sitting across the room with Sophie. He noticed me and smiled. I smiled back. There was no anger left between us, only understanding. After the awards ceremony, Lucas and Sophie started talking. Kids don't carry resentment the way adults do. Within minutes, they were laughing together. Watching them, I realized something. Vanessa had spent years dividing lives. But the truth, painful as it was, had finally brought honesty back into all of them. Sometimes people ask me what the hardest part of the entire experience was. It wasn't discovering that my wife had another husband. It wasn't learning she'd been living a second life just a few streets away. The hardest part was accepting that the woman I thought I knew had never really existed. The person I loved was built on secrets. But the life I rebuilt afterward, that one was finally real.